The room went quiet after my mother said it. Not the warm kind of quiet that belongs to Christmas nights. Not the peaceful silence of snow falling outside. This was the sharp kind of quiet, the kind that cuts. Christmas lights blinked softly around the living room, their red and gold reflections dancing across polished ornaments. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted through the house, mixed with roasted turkey and sweet apple pie. The tree stood tall beside the fireplace, wrapped in sparkling ribbons. Wrapping paper covered the floor like colorful snow. Everyone had finished opening gifts. Everyone except me. The TV across the room glowed brightly, displaying photos from my sister Rachel's phone. One after another, images of her new house appeared on the screen. A wide white porch, large front windows, a bright green lawn. My mother clasped her hands together proudly. "Look at that," she said, almost glowing with pride. "My daughter bought a house." The room erupted with admiration. "Oh, wow. That place is gorgeous. Rachel, that's incredible." My sister smiled modestly, though the excitement in her eyes gave her away. She had worked hard for it, and I knew she deserved the praise. But then my mother turned her head and looked directly at me. Her smile shifted into something sharper. She lifted her wine glass slightly and laughed. "Your sister bought a house," she said loudly. "When will you finally settle down?" The words hung in the air. Then came the laughter. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind that assumes the joke is harmless. My uncle chuckled. My cousin hid a smirk behind his napkin. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly, and I just sat there, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. For a moment, I didn't respond. I stared at the blinking Christmas lights reflected in the window. 32 years old, still the same role, still the comparison. Rachel the success, me the disappointment. My mom leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the moment. "Honestly," she continued, shaking her head, 32 years old and still renting tiny apartments. Jumping from job to job. Stability isn't that scary, sweetheart. A few people laughed again. I felt the heat creep up my neck. Not because the words were shocking. They weren't. I'd heard versions of them for years. Family dinners, birthdays, graduations. Every milestone somehow turned into a reminder that I hadn't reached the same ones Rachel had. She had the perfect timeline. College degree, corporate job, promotion, boyfriend, engagement, and now a house. Meanwhile, my life looked different, messier, less predictable. None of them had ever wanted to know. I set the mug down slowly on the table. "I already settled down," I said quietly. Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please," she laughed. "You always say mysterious things like that." My uncle leaned forward. "What does that even mean?" he asked. I looked around the table. Every face had turned toward me now, waiting, expecting some awkward explanation. Maybe another strange life decision. Maybe another failure disguised as a plan. For a second, I thought about telling them, about explaining everything, but something stopped me. Because suddenly I realized something simple. They were asking because they cared. They were asking because they wanted confirmation. Confirmation that their story about me was right. So I smiled. "Never mind," I said. Mom shook her head dramatically. "See?" she said to the room. "He does this every time." She turned back to Rachel. "Anyway, tell everyone about the backyard." Rachel brightened again. "Oh, it's actually my favorite part," she said. She grabbed the remote and flipped to another photo. A huge green lawn appeared on the screen. Gasps of admiration followed. "That's enormous. You could host weddings there." Mom leaned forward proudly. "My daughter finally has a proper home." Her voice softened with pride. The kind she rarely used with me. Rachel glanced in my direction briefly. Not smug, not cruel, just uncertain. She'd always been kind, but kindness didn't erase the comparison. "It's beautiful," I told her honestly. She smiled. Thanks. Dinner continued after that. Plates clinked. Wine glasses refilled. Stories flowed around the table. But I felt like I was watching everything from outside the room. My mom eventually circled back to me again. Because somehow she always did. So, she said casually while cutting a slice of pie, what exactly are you doing these days? Several heads turned again. I wiped my hands on a napkin. Working, I said. Doing what exactly? There it was. The question. The one I had answered dozens of times before. And yet every time I answered it, the response was always the same. Confusion, dismissal, or laughter. So I hesitated. There were 1,000 ways to explain it. But none of them would make sense tonight. I'm building something, I said finally. Mom let out a short laugh. Oh, good Lord, she said. Another project. My cousin snorted quietly. Uncle Dan shook his head. You had a lot of those. I felt the sting again. But this time I didn't react, because what they called projects had slowly become something real, something they had never bothered to see. I pushed my chair back. I should probably head out, I said. Mom frowned immediately. You just got here. I've got an early morning. That's ridiculous. It's Christmas. Rachel looked concerned. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, but staying another hour would only make things worse. Another joke, another comparison, another reminder that I wasn't living the life they expected. I stood up and grabbed my coat from the chair. Mom called out as I moved toward the door. You know, she said teasingly, next Christmas, maybe you'll have some real news to share. The room chuckled again. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought about turning around, about telling them everything. But instead, I simply looked back at her. Maybe, I said. Then I stepped outside. Cold winter air rushed into my lungs. The street was quiet, blanketed in fresh snow. The soft glow of Christmas lights lined the houses along the block. Inside my parents' house, I could still hear laughter. I walked slowly to my car. The snow crunched under my boots. Each step felt lighter. Not because the night had been easy, but because I finally understood something. For years I had tried to explain my choices, tried to defend them, tried to prove that my path wasn't failure, just different. But tonight showed me something clearly. They weren't interested in understanding. They wanted a story that made sense to them. Rachel the success, me the unfinished problem. I sat in my car and closed the door. Silence filled the cabin. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. I started the engine and watched the frost slowly melt from the windshield. You have no idea, I whispered quietly. Then I pulled away from the curb. The city lights faded as I drove farther out. Past the suburbs, past the shopping centers, past the last street lights, the highway turned into a quiet country road. Snow-covered fields stretched endlessly on both sides. The world grew quieter with every mile. Finally, I turned onto a long gravel driveway. At the end of it stood a small wooden house. Warm yellow light glowed through its windows. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney. I parked the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, I simply sat there, looking at the house. The house they didn't know existed. The life they had never asked about. And for the first time that night, I smiled. Because inside that house, someone was waiting for me. The porch light flicked on the moment my car rolled up the gravel driveway. Before I even had time to turn off the engine, the front door burst open. Daddy! A small pair of boots thudded across the wooden porch. Then a tiny blur launched straight toward me. I barely had time to step out of the car before Lily jumped into my arms. I caught her easily, lifting her high as she wrapped both arms around my neck. Whoa! I laughed softly. Careful there, Bug. You were gone forever, she complained, pressing her cheek against mine. It was 2 hours. That's forever. Her serious little voice made me smile despite everything that had happened earlier. From the doorway, Sarah stood leaning against the frame with her arms folded, watching us with a small smile. "You told our son it might still be around," she said. "So she refused to sleep." Lily gasped dramatically. "She!" I laughed. Oops. The warmth of the house wrapped around me the moment we stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. A small Christmas tree glowed gently in the corner of the living room, its soft lights reflecting off simple glass ornaments we had hung together earlier that week. Underneath the tree sat a few wrapped presents, nothing extravagant, but each one had been chosen carefully, the kind of gifts that meant something. Sarah took my coat and hung it on the rack by the door. "You're late," she said gently. I shrugged. "Family dinner." She raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, your mom?" I sighed as I sat down on the couch, Lily climbing beside me like a sleepy kitten. "Your sister bought a house," I said in my best imitation of my mother's voice. "When will you finally settle down?" Sarah groaned. "Oh, wow," she said. "New material." She even raised her wine glass when she said it. Sarah shook her head slowly. "Your family really knows how to keep traditions alive." Lily looked between us curiously. "What's settle down?" she asked. Sarah walked over and knelt in front of her. "It means finding a place where you belong," she explained softly. Lily thought about that. Her small face scrunched with concentration. Then she looked around the room. At the glowing tree, at the wooden walls, at me. Her expression brightened. "Oh," she said proudly. "Then Daddy already did." My chest tightened slightly. Sometimes children understood things adults complicated. Sarah stood up and handed me a warm mug. Steam curled into the air. "Hot chocolate," she said. "You're a hero." "I know." I took a sip and let the warmth spread through me. The quiet of the house felt like medicine after the noise of my parents' place. Outside, snow continued to fall softly. Inside, everything felt calm. Sarah sat down beside me. "You could tell them," she said gently after a moment. I shook my head. "No point." She looked around the house. "You built this place with your own hands." "Yeah, you built your business from nothing." "Yeah, you adopted Lily when no one else would." I looked down at my daughter. Her head rested against my shoulder now, her eyelids drooping. "Still," I said softly. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Your mom thinks success looks like a mortgage and a big lawn." I looked around the small living room, the wooden beams, the handmade shelves, the coffee table I had carved from a single oak slab. "No," I said quietly. "She thinks success looks like Rachel." Sarah didn't argue. Because she knew it was true. Rachel had always been the golden child, the one who followed the expected path: college, corporate job, promotion, engagement, house. Every step of her life made sense to people like my mom. My path had never made sense. 3 years ago, I had been bouncing between tiny apartments and temporary jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Most people thought I was drifting, but I wasn't drifting. I was learning. And eventually, one small opportunity had changed everything. I'd helped a friend repair a broken dining table. Just a small favor. But when the table was finished, something clicked. The smell of wood. The feeling of shaping something real with my hands. The quiet satisfaction of building something that would last longer than a paycheck. I started small. A few tools, a tiny rented workspace. Custom furniture orders from friends. Then friends of friends. Then strangers. It grew slowly, painfully slowly at first. But it grew. Until one day I realized I didn't need this city anymore. That was when I found this land. A small patch outside the city. Cheap because no one wanted it. No paved roads, no fancy neighbors, just quiet. I bought it with almost everything I had. And then I built. Piece by piece, board by board. Every wall, every window, every beam. Every beam. This house wasn't big, but every inch of it had a story. Sarah stood and walked toward the kitchen. You know, she said while filling the kettle, if your mom ever saw this place, she'd feel terrible, maybe. You built an entire life she doesn't even know about. I leaned back on the couch. That's because she never asked. Sarah carried another mug back to the couch. Still, she said softly, you deserve recognition. I shook my head. I didn't build this life for recognition. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep. Daddy? Yeah, Bug? Did Grandma like Christmas? I smiled faintly. Yeah, I said. She loves Christmas. Does she have a tree? Probably a huge one. Lily looked at our small tree thoughtfully. Ours is better. Oh yeah. Yeah, she said firmly. Because we picked it together? Sarah smiled at that. Kids didn't measure things the same way adults did. They measured moments. Not size. Lily yawned loudly. Okay, Sarah said. Bedtime. Noo, Lily groaned weakly. Yes. 5 minutes? You said that 30 minutes ago. I stood up and carried her toward the hallway. Her head rested against my shoulder. Half asleep already. As I tucked her into bed, she grabbed my hand. Daddy? Yeah? The question caught me off guard. I paused for a moment. I don't know, I said honestly, but maybe she seemed satisfied with that answer. Okay, she murmured sleepily. Within a minute, she was asleep. I quietly closed the bedroom door and walked back to the living room. Sarah was sitting by the tree. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yeah, she studied my face carefully. You're thinking about what she said. A little. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Your mom doesn't understand your life because she's never seen it. I sat down across from her. Maybe she never will. Sarah tilted her head. Or maybe she just hasn't had the chance. I considered that. For years I had kept my distance from my family, partly because of the constant criticism, partly because I wanted to build something real before explaining it, before letting them judge it. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now. The world looked soft and quiet beyond the windows. Sarah stood and placed another log in the fireplace. Flames flickered brighter. You know something? She said. What? Your mom thinks she embarrassed you tonight. I looked up. But the truth is, Sarah continued, she embarrassed herself. I laughed softly. Maybe. She walked over and kissed my forehead, because the sun she mocked for not settling down. She gestured around the room. It's the only one who actually did. I leaned back and watched the fire for a while, thinking about my family, about Rachel's beautiful new house, about the dinner table, about the laughter, and strangely, I didn't feel angry, just calm, because the truth didn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it simply needed to exist, and here it was. A small house built with my own hands. A quiet business that grew stronger every year. A daughter who believed this place was the best home in the world. Sarah sat beside me again. You know, she said thoughtfully, one day your mom is going to find out. How? She shrugged. Life has a funny way of revealing things. I smiled slightly. Maybe, but deep down I knew something. If my mother ever stood on this porch, if she ever walked through this house, if she ever saw the family I had built without her approval, she might finally understand something she had missed for years. The son she mocked for not settling down was the only one who truly had. And when that moment came, it wouldn't feel like revenge. It would feel like truth.